Whispers, I mean, it's all prep for that one. It was because you're going outside the box, and there was so many elements in it that were entirely new. We got the whole fog element to deal with, which was, a huge ordeal, and the planning that went into that was crazy. And it was just a good, rollicking story.
One of the things that we've never done is a true horror episode, and I've always been a fan of horror movies, so I thought, well, why not? I've had the most fun working with Will on this episode. When I pitched out the story idea to him, I said, are you a fan of horror movies? And he's like, oh, I'm a huge fan. And he went off and he picked up a stack of DVDs and he was going through them and thinking, what would be some cool shots.
Sat at home and watched reams of movies just to see little things that you could glean from here and there. How did these guys deal with fog? Did it look like this was a vis effect? How was this done? Just because there's all these little gags that are in the episode that we managed to pull from it.
Well, prep is always important, obviously. In an episode, you just don't go in and shoot it cold. In this case, because of the fog element, it was key that we had to sort of go in and decide, what was the best way to shoot, shoot the fog.
Well, yeah. I mean, first you read the script, and Joe's preparing you by saying just all this fog in the script, and I'm third of the way through it. That's just one scene, and then you realize there's all this stuff that takes place in the fog, and what the beats that happen to be in the fog, and you go, holy shit, how are we going to do this? So we start by doing fog tests. We took stage 5, completely fogged it out, because, in the script, I couldn't see the camera there. It's supposed to be that thick, you can't see 20 feet. So we laid that much fog in the set, brought the camera in to shoot, and people were falling all over each other. You couldn't breathe, for one thing. You can't see where you're going. You're getting disoriented. The footage looked great, but it was absolutely, you could not shoot an episode that way.
So anyways, things are going swimmingly here on Whispers. I think I just hyperventilated, so if I pass out during this little blurb, Lauren, the cameraman, is going to give me not CPR. He's just going to call the first aid guy. He'll do whatever.
I remember when we did the test, a couple of people who were at the test were like, oh, I feel so dizzy. So, we were kind of worried that, we wouldn't want people dropping. So, we had to bring down the level of the fog. And, since the fog element was so important to this episode, we needed to have, I guess, a significant amount of fog. James Robbins came up with the idea of actually using fog tents. And what we did was we created 3 separate tents.
So Kenny Young, a rigging grapher, has set up all these rock and roll trusses. It looks like they're setting up for the Rolling Stones. And they've all got these rolled up plastics on the side, and he hits a button and this 20 by 30 tent would drop down, and they pull strings and all these flaps would drop down, and you've got this instant tent. And you could fill it in 5 minutes with the required amount of smoke so that you can't see in the tent, yet outside the tent everybody's got a happy-go-lucky existence. Now our village that we shoot in isn't very big. And if we'd just fogged the village up in itself, you wouldn't really see anything except just white and the occasional building edge here. So I had Set Deck make all those, what should we call them, the busted market stands, so that if you fill the village with those, and when we're shooting in the tent, you only needed 4 of them in the tent, you've got a gauge to see how deep the fog is. Because if I'm beside one of these, I can see it, but as it recedes into the fog, it disappears. It gives you a sense of scale. And that also helped expand the size of the village, because you could run through these things forever and ever. And, you never realize you're just running past the same couple that have turned this way and that way.
Another element was the creatures themselves. We wanted a certain look for the creatures, so we had to talk things through with Todd Masters and his gang, and they went through separate, different tests. And one of the things about the creatures is the fact that, they have no eyes. I mean, what I always find scary in horror movies is not so much the the monstrous, but the real with a slight alteration.
I thought they looked fantastic. And the big concern was, because we're going to have so much fog where you can't see anything anyways, put an eyeless creature into that. Now what are we going to do? So we ended up cutting slits and wrinkles in the masks, and Todd and Nick made them so that all the masks you could see out of, at least a bit.
The actors couldn't see all that well, but they could see well enough to get around until that last sequence where basically it's, we fogged the crap out of that set, and we had them all in different positions, and then Will yelled, "Okay, action!" And basically they were all supposed to be walking around, and we're kind of stumbling around, didn't know where they were going, and then there was a problem, and Will's like, back to first positions, and you can see them kind of like stumbling around, and it was kind of sad. Just the idea that it just happens to be foggy on this spooky night didn't really work. I thought it was a bit of a cheat. So, I came up with the idea that these creatures essentially exude the mist through their neck.
Because they exude fog from their gills, we had one of the creatures, Chris, plumbed with his mask, actually had the gills and had all these pipes running to the gills down his back to this big fog machine.
In the initial test, it just came out way too fast. It looked like, Fred Flintstone blowing his top. So, we said, well, take it down a bit, and they took it down. And then in the final sequence, I thought it worked really well. It looked really good.
In this particular scene, Beckett is on the run from one of the creatures, and he's lost in the fog, and he thinks he's outrun them. At first we're going to sort of establish him on the run. We're going to have Beckett pressed up against the wall, and then we're going to have the actor Paul McGillian actually lying down, so that when the creature crawls in, he will be crawling actually, he will not be defying gravity, but the way it will be shot will actually look like he's actually crawling up and down the wall.
I've storyboarded the whole sequence. How Beckett comes and meets the creature, how he runs away from the creature. We've got the practical wall that we shot him against. Go to our fog tent. We had pre-made a whole section of wall, laid it on its side. Had a crane in there, and then we put a little pony wall here so that he would lie on the ground like this and just hold his stomach muscles in to pull him off the wall, and then the creature could just crawl on his hands and knees essentially, but when it was lit appropriately and edited together, it looks like he comes down the wall. It's just sleight of hand. Just so you had the ability and the pre-planning and ability to build the stuff to do that. Otherwise it would have been a vis effect, and I don't think it would have worked as well. Well, score is a whole other layer of what, of the suspense and building up to a scare, and even, the scare itself and the aftermath.
I gave Joel a call, and I gave him a heads up, and Joel's done fantastic work for us. I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of the type of scores he can do. Talking
to Joe about that, it was like, I just said, what do you think if we do a little temp just for, it can't go into the producer cuts because it's not something that would go past that, but just for the first cut, just for the enjoyment of the producers upstairs watching, I'll throw some temp music in. And I got a bunch of soundtracks from every horror movie that everybody loves, and it was great. The editor had a great time putting it in and mixing it in and out, and especially there's the long sequence where they're scoping through the village. And it really worked beautifully for that, just keeping the suspense and the driving of that along.
One of the elements in this episode that I thought was kind of interesting was the fact that we introduced an all-female team, or more importantly, sort of a team of characters that we never really met before. And the point of that was twofold. One, I mentioned the fact that I wanted to redress kind of a gender imbalance in the show, especially with Carter leaving.
Well, they were all fantastic. I mean, we had Janina and Christina and Nicole and Leela. And I insisted early on that we have to get the girls into town early so that they could take a gun school. And we ran them all through 4 or 5 hours of loading and shooting P90s and handguns and just moving, because they all have to be military. And I've seen a couple times before where we bring in guest cast and they have to be military, but you don't quite buy it. So these guys did a half day of gun school and movement school so that they could, when they're loading and shooting, you can believe what they're doing. And that, because Christina had done a bunch of that before, and she's so damn good at it, the other girls were all like, well, shit, I got to do this, get as good as she is. And, they just had that whole camaraderie within them to do that. pans out because they look kick-ass when they're shooting, and even just the way they're moving.
You know, I think there are like about a dozen really good scares, and by scares I mean kind of real shocks in the episode, and you know, some work better than others, and you know, I hope it scares the crap out of some fans.
Imagine shooting the super long hours in the fog and the black earth that was leaving your nose filled with chunks of black goo at the end of the night. It was pretty exhausting and tough to do, but nobody complained. The cast were fantastic, the crew were fantastic. Kudos.